Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with an Enfield MkII black powder revolver. Now, 5 or 6 years ago, I did a video on the Enfield MkI, and today we're going to take a look at its sort of band-aided, patched, improved, sort of. It is definitely an improved model of the Enfield, but not improved enough to actually make it a good gun. This is a revolver that was adopted by the British military in 1880. They probably should have, correct that, they definitely should have picked something different, but they didn't. There were a number of problems with the MkI, which led to the MkII design a mere 2 years after the adoption of the MkI. This made things a little bit better, but still not great. Now, the most interesting element of the Enfield revolvers is the fact that they have a selective ejection system. The other common gun that did this, that was around at basically this similar sort of time frame, was the Merwin and Hulbert revolver in the United States. The idea is you can fire part of the cylinder, a few of the rounds, and then pop the thing open, and it will spit out all of the empty cases, but it will leave the live ammo that you haven't fired yet still in the gun. And then you can close it and open the side gate and load, like replace the ejected empty cases. That sounds cool, especially if you've never used a gun like that. In practice, it's not a great system. And it led to problems that, well, part of what the MkII had to try to fix was problems with the selective ejection system. So let's dive in, take a closer look at what changed on the Enfield MkII. On top of everything else, it's just not a good looking revolver either. This front hinge is just kind of goofy. Anyway, this example was made by Enfield in 1884. It is a MkII as designated right there. It is all matching and it is serial number A343. And one kind of cool additional element to this particular one is that it is marked NSW, that is New South Wales. We also have a New South Wales mark here on the backstrap. These were used by a lot of colonial security organizations. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police actually had these probably longer than anybody else. They had them almost up to World War I. But Australia, New Zealand, South Africa would see a lot of use of Enfield revolvers. Now, the way this selective ejection system is supposed to work is that you pull back the locking latch here, pivot the barrel forward, it's going to pull the cylinder forward, and you can see that our extractor claw stays back here near the back end of the revolver, and the idea is all the rims sit under that. If the cartridge has been fired, the cartridge case is just about this length, and it will fall out. If it has not been fired, it has a bullet still in it, is longer, and it is stuck fully inside the cylinder, and it will not fall out. The problem is the cartridges tend to wibble wobble around. They will move partially out of orientation, and it's what sounds like a really slick, quick system to use on paper is in fact a real pain to actually use in practice. All right, looking at the changes, starting at the front, the MkII has a nice, simple, and smooth rounded front sight. The MkI had a pointy front sight that could get stuck in a holster and was more complicated to manufacture. We have simplification of the machining profiles in a couple of places. They simplified the profile down here. The front of the top strap here is a little simpler. You have like just continuous cuts where the MkI had extra features machined in that didn't really need to be there. These little fins are flat and smooth. They were fluted on the MkIs. Those are, by the way, holster guides. So the purpose of those, and you'll see them on later Webley revolvers as well, is so that you can, if you stuff this thing into a holster, these will push the body of the holster open, where if you didn't have them, if the holster was a little tight, it would just jam on the front of the cylinder. Mechanically speaking, two of the things that people didn't like about the MkIs were that the cylinder could revolve freely while the gun had it hammered down and was not in use. And the concern here was you could fire a couple shots and then you might accidentally rotate the cylinder and you would lose track of which rounds had been fired and which hadn't. In addition, when you opened the loading gate there to reload the revolver, the hammer and trigger still functioned, and so in theory, if you were an idiot, if you had your finger on the trigger, you could like accidentally fire a round while loading the gun. Not super likely, but it's something that they wanted to fix. And in theory, they did. You can actually see additional little notches here on the Mark II cylinder that are intended to line up with a cylinder stop that is located way back in there. However, this improvement was also a little fragile. They did it by adding a couple of very small parts inside the lockwork. And on this particular example, those parts are in place, but they don't actually work. I can open the cylinder and still operate the trigger and hammer. And of course, as you already saw, the cylinder still free spins when the hammer is down. So they did implement these improvements, but it's kind of a kludge to an already complicated design, and they could wear out like this one has. In order to simplify disassembly, they added a second side plate screw to the gun. The original ones had this screw, the Mark I's had this screw, but not this one. And then there are two little notches under here, so you can take these two screws out and then use your screwdriver to just gently pry up on the side plate to get access to the lockwork. They also, instead of having the grips attached by screw, they have the grips attached by the butt plate and the lanyard loop here. So this is actually threaded in place. I can pull that out, and now I have a little punch, and I can then pull the grips off. So the grip frame on the Webley Mark II is actually rather shorter than most people would probably expect it to be. And we have a single piece grip right there. Oh, and while we're here, this grip is smooth. The Mark I grips were checkered. I guess that was deemed not really necessary and more work that didn't need to be done, so Mark IIs, they just left the grips smooth. Now we also have to talk about ammunition, because during the transition from Mark I to Mark II Enfield revolvers, there was also a transition from the Enfield Mark II to the Enfield Mark III cartridge. And these are a little complicated. So one of the issues they had with the Mark I's is that bullets under recoil would occasionally jump free of the cartridge case, and after a couple of shots they could migrate far enough forward that the tip of the bullet would protrude out the front of the cylinder and it would jam the action up. It may be counterintuitive to think of recoil causing the bullets to go forward. What's actually happening is under recoil, the gun is going backwards. The bullets, being very dense lead, have a bunch of inertia. They want to stay in place, and so they tend to stay there while the case and the gun recoil backwards. Hence, it appears the bullet's moving forward. Anyway, one of the ways that the British thought they could address this was by increasing the diameter of the bullet so that it would fit more tightly into the cylinder. They also actually slightly tapered the cylinders so that the bullet has to swage itself down a little bit when fired. And they also, well, the initial stopgap solution was to add a couple of punch crimps to the case. But what they ended up doing was adopting the Mark III cartridge, which went from a .455-inch bullet, the Webley 455 that we're used to hearing about, to a heeled bullet. The idea of a heeled bullet is instead of having a cartridge case with a bullet sitting inside it, you now have a cartridge case where the bullet is the same diameter as the case itself, and there's a little step in the base of the bullet. So the case diameter and the bullet diameter are the same. That's as big as you can make the bullet and still allow it to fit into a chamber that's been machined to fit the case. In doing that, the bullet for this particular cartridge was scaled up, so it was .477, which in commercial terms was generally referred to as .476. At any rate, by doing that, the British hoped to solve the problem of bullets coming unseated in these revolvers. They also figured that that would give them a little bit better accuracy in the Enfield revolvers. These use Henry rifling, which is kind of an oddball style of rifling that has some little triangular, actually sort of pointed elements in it. And I can see how a larger diameter bullet would perhaps seal better. That was part of the idea because the Enfield revolvers use Henry rifling. So development of that Mark III cartridge was going on side by side with improvement of the revolver, and the two are kind of inextricably linked to each other. I need to do a separate video at some point on the different variations of British revolver, black powder military revolver cartridge. It is I think a poorly understood and very weird, complicated subject to get into. But that's a subject for another video. If you would like to know more about it right now, or if you would like to see some 3D animations of the added safety elements that were added to these revolvers on one that actually works instead of one like this that is worn out. Definitely check out the See an Arsenal video on the Enfield MkII. I will link to it down in the description text. As I said at the beginning, the Mk I Enfield was adopted in 1880, and a grand total of 12,419 of those were manufactured between, well, 1880 and 1881. In 1882, the Mk II version was adopted. It went into production that same year. It's not that many machining changes from the Mk I, easy to update your production line. And a bit more of these would be made. 13,102 of them are produced, with serial production essentially ending in 1885. So they made these for about 4 years and made just a few more than the original Mk Is. Now, these would be spread out across the world. A lot of these went to British colonial presences in far-flung places from Canada to Australia and everywhere in between. There was an incident in 1887 when a British sailor, who was issued an Enfield, bent over, the gun fell out of his holster, dropped onto the hammer, which hit the cartridge underneath, discharged, shot the sailor, and killed him. This is a very similar story to what happened with the Smith & Wesson Victory models in the US during World War II, incidentally. The British reaction was to quickly develop an internal safety system to prevent this from happening again. And in theory, by 1889, it was supposed to have been applied to all of the Enfield revolvers that were still in military service. However, a great many of these guns had gone to the aforementioned far-flung corners of the earth, and they never came back for any sort of upgrade. So a lot of the guns, including this one, don't actually have those added safety mechanisms. Not that they're a big deal today, and of course, you can pretty much avoid all of the potential issues by, don't carry this gun with a live round under the hammer. Easy. Anyway, fortunately for the British military, in 1887, they would adopt the Webley Mk I revolver, also a top break, but one that has a much more traditional ejection system. The Webley would go on to be a famously successful revolver in British military service, Marks I through 6, and then 38 caliber guns as well. It would serve in World War II. Much, much better gun, and I'm sure the British military was happy to be free of this, well, essentially, mistake. So, big thanks to Morphees for giving me the chance to show you this cool New South Wales marked Mk II. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.